Hey friends, this is Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight. And today I want to give you a brief update on our election activities, election integrity activities over the past couple of years, what we've gotten done and our current status to bring everybody up to date. Although we've done a lot of other things recently, and this will give those people a chance. Let me just get one person here I know who wants to join in. So hopefully you can kind of see this whiteboard behind me. First of all, back in 2016 in the primary, so this was Bernie Sanders versus Hillary Clinton mainly is what we were looking at, versus Bernie Sanders. And particularly, we found a problem between the early vote by mail ballots and all the other ballot types. There's four sets: early vote by mail, the polling place ballots, then the vote by mail that are processed after election day, and the provisionals, which come in last. The early vote by mail ballots was the only set where Hillary Clinton won in San Diego. And this batch of ballots was processed very strangely by the registrar of voters in San Diego, Michael Vu. He actually hired 70 people to go in for a week and pre-process and pre-stack the ballots so that they would come out right in the audit. And then our main first lawsuit, though, was because there was 285,000 ballots that were missing from the audit. We asked him to include those ballots, and he said no. So we filed the lawsuit during the process of the 2016 election, and eventually we won that. But the court would not force him to go back and redo it. But he was required to include them in the future. But then we both appealed it. We appealed it because we wanted to apply to other counties, and they appealed it because they didn't think they needed to do that at all, even though it says it very clearly in the law. Unfortunately, they snuck through this bill called AB 840 late in 2017, I think, right after. So in 2016, we filed the case. It went forward. And at the end of the year, it was finally, we won. Then in 2017, we appealed it. But during 2017, they processed this AB 840 in the legislature, and they snuck this through by our friend Alex Padilla and Dean Logan in Los Angeles, and this sort of sleazy group called the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, CASIO, who was working to gut the effectiveness of the audit. And so then they allow omission of those early vote by mail ballots. So they're able to leave out these 285,000 or more ballots, and it was even more in this more recent election. So unfortunately, because they passed this law, the appeal reversed the lower decision and denied the attorney's fees, which is really absurd. Basically, they're saying that even though we won the case and proved that they violated the law, they're saying that now the law has changed. And so now we find that they didn't violate the law at all back then. And also because even though you guys won in all of the case, we're going to reverse that and say that the law was never like that to begin with. So this is the sort of crap that goes on with regard to if you sue the government, they can just change the laws and make it okay. Now going down here, we also, because we were suspicious about these early vote by mail ballots, we filed this ballot access lawsuit that was after we attempted to get them using the California Public Records Act. The California Public Records Act is California Code 6250 and so forth. And what it says, and a lot of states have this now, it acknowledges that the government is owned by the people, and therefore the public owns everything that the government does, including all the records. And therefore, you can go to a government agency and say, I'd like such and such a record. And if it's a document, they have to give it to you within 10 days or explain why they can't get it to you that fast. So a very powerful thing to use is to be able to get records from the government. So we asked for the ballots, and they said, no, we're not going to do it. So we filed a lawsuit. The lower court ruled that even though the ballots are sealed and required to be kept for 22 months, we can't get to them because they are sealed. And we claim that the reason that they're sealed is not so that we can't get to them, but so that no one will, fool with them or change them. Why would you be required to keep the ballots for 22 months if no one can look at them? And then at the end of 22 months, they just shred them. So this whole idea of keeping them under seal means that no one can question what happened in the election, is how they've got it rigged up. Now, these election laws were from back in the they're actually written a long time ago. And in California, it was like the 1800s, and they redid them a little bit more recently. But in 1964, you had the Public Records Act come out. And that said that they were acknowledging that these ballots, and documents from the government are public property. And then in 2004, we had a constitutional amendment in California, which states very early on in the Constitution that any laws that existed previously would be interpreted broadly, or most narrowly, however you want to look at it, so that the public would have the most access to the ballots. And if you do that with this law, you would say that the sealed only means that they have to keep them from being altered, not that no one can ever look at them. This is still in process. The appellate court has not ruled for or against us, but all of the paperwork is in, and we're just waiting for them. So it'll be pretty interesting if we can get access to the ballots. They're required supposedly to keep them all this time, so that when this case gets done, we would be able to go back and actually look to see what they did in this primary election. We also, down here, hopefully you can see this, I don't know if this comes through, but we had what's called a contest of the 2016 primary. And a contest, or kind of like to contest it, means that we want to have this judicial process to question what happened in the 2016 primary. This is where you go into court and you say, okay, I want to do discovery, I want to look at the ballots, and this is what we tried to do. But we could not show that the irregularities in San Diego were enough to change the primary outcome in the state of California, and then in the rest of the primary, and then would change the outcome versus Trump. So they said, basically the primary is something that the party is in control of, and they can do whatever they want. It's kind of like an advisory vote that we in these states say that we want a certain candidate. But I always imagine if Bernie Sanders had won California, then that may have changed his calculus in terms of giving up so soon, or maybe even the last minute delegates may have turned it around, and we would have had a Bernie Sanders running instead of a crippled Hillary Clinton. So that case, unfortunately, was not did not move forward, even though we submitted a complaint to the to the Secretary of State. They did not process that, and we haven't really followed it up enough to force them to do so. Finally, I want to talk about election oversight. So we have been working to continually provide oversight of the audits and of the elections. And we find the audits are really important because what that does is do a final check on the elections, on the election. And in California, they have to do these audits, and they may not be really, really good in terms of, how statistically strong they are. But the idea is that if any fraudster knows that the election is being audited, then they're going to say, well, gee, there's a chance I could be caught, so I better not do that. If it's not audited at all, then they can say, well, no one's going to audit this, so I can just do whatever the hell I want. So we're watching the audits, and now they have a new law that happened called AB 2125, which was approved to allow risk limiting audits to be pilot tested in California. And I've been doing quite a bit of work and I'm going to do some other videos about this to get into kind of a deep dive into risk limiting audits and what that means and how we're going to need to understand that so that we can provide oversight for those risk limiting audits, because it really doesn't help very much if the election official goes in the back room, says, I hired some, statisticians, they taken a look at the election and everything is fine. We gave ourselves an A. Well, the trouble is they're doing an audit of themselves. That's like asking people to give themselves a ticket if they speed on the freeway. Guess what? You're not going to get very many tickets given. And they're not going to be very eager to turn themselves in if they did a lousy job in their election. So as a result, we still need to be on top of watching our elections each time they happen. Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining me on this quick update of election integrity. I'm going to have, as I said, follow-on videos to talk about risk limiting audits and explain how they kind of pan out and compare them with other ways of doing it. Bottom line, we got to have hand-marked paper ballots. That's number one. We want them hand-marked because then the voter has the best chance of watching what he's doing. There's no question that they're reviewing what they're marking versus a marking device that they're bringing into Los Angeles and other places, which you vote on a touch screen and then it prints out the ballot and the person might look at it. Or in some cases, they'll just say, I don't need to look at it, put straight into the bin. Well, if they get someone to say, put it straight into the bin, you don't know what's printed on that ballot. There was never any review. So having hand-marked paper ballots is really important. Of course, paper ballots, so we can review them later. But of course, here was the problem I brought up. We can't get to the ballots to review them. And so that means that there is no real review, even though we have paper ballots in California. We got to get past this. When we have paper ballots, we have to be able to look at them. And then follow on with the paper ballots, being able to get to them, and also now the new equipment. And by the way, in California, they have just decertified all of the election equipment. Not all of it, but a lot of it. I believe in San Diego, it's been decertified. So they have to, they're going to have to replace that equipment. They have $134 million to replace the equipment. It isn't enough, but it has to be matched and so forth. It's not going to be enough to actually have these counties fully replace their equipment with risk limiting on it capable equipment. Right now, there's only 2 vendors that are available for equipment that is certified by the state. However, put that all aside. What we need to get is, as I said, hand-marked paper ballots. I believe we need to have them all fully imaged with digital images so that we can get to the images. That's a far easier thing to do than to get to the actual paper ballots. I can get we can put up a crowdsourced review of all of the ballot images online. We can hand count them if we want. We can have our own software look them over. So ballot images is really going to stop any kind of manipulation. They have to be secured images so that they can't be changed later. And all that I will get into in other videos. And finally, having these audits, these election audits reviewed and watched. As I said, if you have the election official go into the back room and say, I just audited everything and everything's fine, you can trust me, that doesn't give us much confidence if we don't really understand what they're doing and have enough visibility to check it ourselves. The public is the bottom line on elections. We have to do our job to oversee them, or all bets are off. Okay, Ray Lutz with Citizens Oversight. We'll talk to you later. Bye now.